How brutality of Assyrians created an empire. Medes and creation of First Iranian Empire. Who were the Medes? The Medes belonged to the larger family of Indo-Iranian peoples who migrated into Iran around the end of the 2nd millennium BCE. They were horsemen, herders, and warriors, living in loosely connected clans across the land known as Media, roughly modern-day northwestern Iran. But unlike their Persian cousins who lived farther south, the Medes were on the front lines. To their west loomed the Assyrian Empire, brutal, disciplined, and feared across the ancient Near East. The shadow of Assyria. For centuries, the Assyrians dominated Mesopotamia with an iron fist. They were not just conquerors, they were masters of psychological warfare. Their armies crushed cities, deported populations, and carved terrifying reliefs that showed the fate of rebels. Flayed alive, impaled, or chained. The Medes, scattered in their mountain valleys, felt this power firsthand. Assyrian kings launched constant raids into Median territory, burning villages, demanding tribute, and enslaving their people. Without unity, the Medes were easy prey. But over time, oppression had an unexpected effect. It forced the Medes to come together. What had once been independent tribes realized that survival depended on cooperation. The birth of a kingdom. According to Greek historian Herodotus, the first great unifier was Deioces. Known for his wisdom and sense of justice, he became the natural choice when the tribes decided to appoint a king. Under his rule, the Medes built their first capital city, Ecbatana. It wasn't just a settlement, it was a symbol. High walls, fortresses, and palaces showed the world that the Medes were no longer just wandering tribes, but a people with ambition and identity. Deioces brought order, but it was his successors who turned the Medes into a power. Phraates, his son, began expanding their influence, uniting more Iranian tribes under the Median banner. But the real turning point came under Cyaxares, one of the greatest Median kings. Cyaxares and the fall of Assyria. Cyaxares understood the Assyrians' strengths, but also their weaknesses. He reorganized the Median army, creating specialized units. Archers, cavalry, infantry, a professional force capable of standing against Assyria. Then, in a bold move, he allied with the Babylonians, who also suffered under Assyrian domination. Together, they struck back. In 612 BCE, the Medes and Babylonians besieged Nineveh, the jewel of the Assyrian Empire. The city fell, and with it collapsed an empire that had terrorized the Near East for centuries. For the first time, the Medes stood as equals among the great powers of the world. Legacy of the Medes. The Median Empire stretched across Iran, eastern Anatolia, and parts of Mesopotamia. Though it lasted less than a century before being absorbed by the Persians under Cyrus the Great, the Medes laid the foundations of Iranian statehood. They showed that scattered tribes could unite, that even against the might of Assyria, resistance could succeed. And in their rise and fall, they passed on the torch of empire to the Persians, who would build upon their example and create one of the greatest empires in history. Life in the Median Empire: culture, society, and religion. When we think of the Medes, we often picture their kings and their battles with the Assyrians. But what was life actually like inside their empire? How were their people organized? What did they believe in? Society and social organization. The Medes inherited much from their Indo-Iranian roots, a society shaped by clans, warriors, and herders. But as they formed a kingdom, society became more structured. The king and nobility. At the very top was the king, considered chosen by the gods to rule. Around him stood a class of nobles and powerful clan leaders who controlled land and warriors. These were the backbone of the Median state, providing both loyalty and military strength. The warriors. Like many Iranian peoples, the Medes valued the warrior class highly. Cavalry and skilled archers were their pride. A man's honor was tied to his courage in battle, and much of their expansion was carried on horseback. Common people. Farmers, herders, and craftsmen made up the bulk of society. They worked the land, raised animals, and produced goods. The fertile valleys around Ecbatana and Media's mountains allowed both farming and pasturing horses and sheep. Subject peoples. As the Medes expanded, they ruled over diverse groups: Persians, Armenians, Assyrians, and others. Many of these groups were allowed to keep their own traditions, but they paid tribute to the Median kings. What made the Medes unique is that they weren't trying to erase the cultures they conquered. Instead, they absorbed and blended traditions, a habit the Persians later perfected. Culture and daily life. The Medes left behind fewer monuments than the later Persians, but archaeology and ancient sources give us hints. Ecbatana, their capital, was said by Herodotus to be surrounded by 7 concentric walls, each painted in different colors, from white and black to red, blue, and finally gold and silver at the top. Whether myth or truth, it shows how important symbolism and display were in Median culture. They were skilled in horse breeding and animal husbandry, which gave them both military power and prestige. Horses were a mark of status. Their clothing was distinct: trousers and long-sleeve tunics, practical for riding and the cold mountains, later adopted widely across the Persian Empire. Artifacts suggest that Median artisans were influenced by Assyrian and Urartian art, blending Mesopotamian motifs with Iranian steppe traditions. Religion and beliefs. Religion tied their world together. The Medes shared a spiritual outlook with other ancient Iranians, and though details are scarce, historians believe they followed an early form of Indo-Iranian polytheism, with gods linked to natural forces, sky, fire, and water. Many of these deities were precursors to those in Zoroastrianism, which later flourished under the Persians. Fire had a sacred role, possibly worshipped in open-air sanctuaries on hilltops, as it was a symbol of purity and the divine. They practiced rituals of sacrifice, likely involving animals, and may have believed in cosmic struggles between good and evil, ideas later refined by Zoroaster. Some classical sources even mention magi among the Medes, priestly families who oversaw religious rites, kept traditions, and interpreted omens. These magi later became influential under the Persian kings. The bigger picture. What's fascinating is that Median society was a bridge, from nomadic tribes to a centralized monarchy, from clan-based beliefs to the beginnings of organized priesthoods, from mountain villages to a multi-ethnic empire. They never developed the monumental architecture or writing system of Mesopotamia, but their political and cultural patterns shaped what came after. Without the Medes, the Persian Empire might never have taken the form it did. Thank you for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel to make sure you don't lose next episodes. In next episode, we take a look at how Achaemenid Empire, one of the greatest empires that has ever existed, was created.